Amelia Kinkid barely kept herself from trembling, feeling her hands grow cold despite the hot June day. The room, once cozy and filled with the sounds of their shared life, seemed alien. The air was filled with the barely perceptible scent of Isabel's perfume, bold and expensive, just like her presence. "Are you just going to stand there?" Peter asked mockingly, sprawled on the couch. His voice was laced with self-assurance, as if he expected his words to inevitably lead to her surrender. "We both know this was a matter of time." Next to him sat Isabel, her nails tapping against a wine glass, as if she were participating in some spectacle rather than the destruction of someone else's life. Her smile was icy, challenging. "You heard Amelia," she said, slightly tilting her head like a predator studying its prey. "This house is too small for 3 adults." Amelia clenched her teeth, trying not to reveal the storm raging inside her. "Small," she repeated, looking straight at Peter. "And yet the two of you somehow managed to squeeze in here with your affair." Isabel chuckled softly, her laughter sounding like a slap. "You have until evening," she added, "or we'll throw you out ourselves." "I'll leave," Amelia replied, her voice surprisingly calm. She took a step back, raising her chin, as if trying to preserve the remnants of her dignity. "But I promise, you will regret this." Peter's eyes narrowed. His self-assurance wavered for a moment, but he quickly regained his mask of indifference. "Do what you want, Amelia. You always dramatize." She turned, heading toward the stairs, but her steps slowed when she heard their muffled laughter. It was a laughter that made her heart ache, not from pain but from rage. At that moment, Amelia realized that her tears were not meant for these walls. They were meant for the fight that was just beginning. Earlier that day, everything had seemed so ordinary. Amelia was sitting at her desk finishing a presentation for a client. Graphic design was her passion, and she was proud of her work. After ending a call, she closed her laptop and stretched, enjoying a rare moment of peace. But that moment quickly ended. The sound of the garage door opening broke the silence. "Again," she muttered, heading downstairs. Peter had been coming home too early lately. It was unsettling. In the kitchen, she saw him standing by the fridge. His movements were nervous, like those of someone trying to hide something. "You're home early again," Amelia said, opening the cabinet to get plates. "What's going on, Peter? Why are you coming back earlier so often?" "Work has changed," he replied, not looking her in the eye. "New project. It requires a lot of effort." "New project?" she repeated, gripping the oil bottle a bit too tightly. "With Isabel, right?" His shoulders tensed slightly, but he didn't turn around. "She's good at what she does. Ambitious. We get along." Those words sounded innocuous, but there was a note in Peter's voice that made Amelia feel nauseous. He no longer felt the need to hide his interest in another woman, but she decided not to argue. Today would be different. Today she would find evidence. Amelia waited until Peter left. When the sound of his car faded away, she headed to his office. Her hands trembled as she opened the desk drawers. Among the clutter of papers and notes, she found a receipt, then another. Dinner at an expensive restaurant he never took her to. A hotel room for 2, all in Isabel's name. Her breath quickened. Everything inside her churned, but she knew she couldn't give in to her emotions. When the door downstairs opened, Amelia barely had time to hide the evidence. Her heart pounded like a drum when Peter and Isabel entered the office. Their smiles were demeaning, their gazes defiant. "What does all this mean?" she threw out, holding the receipts in front of them. Peter shrugged. "It's none of your business, Amelia. Isabel is moving in. There's no place for you here anymore." Those words hit her like a hammer, but instead of responding, Amelia took a step back, slowly placed the receipts on the table, and said, "Enjoy yourselves, but this will cost you dearly." She left the room with her head held high, but inside her, a storm raged. She knew that from this moment on, her life would never be the same. But she also knew that she would not be a passive victim. While Peter and Isabel enjoyed their moment of victory, Amelia began packing her things, and with them, pieces of a plan that would not only return her home, but also her dignity. The next morning, Amelia woke up with an unexpected clarity in her mind. The light filtering through the curtains seemed almost like a symbol of a new beginning. She slowly sat up in bed, pondering everything that had happened. From somewhere deep within her soul, A sharp sense of determination arose. If Peter and Isabel thought she would simply disappear, they were sorely mistaken. First, she made a list. It was her plan, her roadmap to regaining control of her life. Her handwriting was firm and clear, just like her intentions. Gather evidence, find a lawyer, develop a defense strategy, prepare for the worst. Each item was a step towards restoring her dignity. Amelia got up, dressed, and headed to the kitchen. She was pouring coffee when her phone vibrated. Vivian's name flashed on the screen. Her heart tightened. She didn't want Vivian to know what had happened, at least not yet. "Hey, Mom!" Vivian's voice was cheerful. "How are you?" Amelia forced herself to smile, though her voice trembled. "Everything's fine, dear. How are your exams?" "Good," Vivian replied. "Are you sure everything's okay? You sound different." "Everything's fine," Amelia assured her. "Just a little tired." After the call, she sighed. The lie came harder than she expected, but she couldn't let Vivian worry. Gathering her resolve, Amelia decided to start with the most important thing: evidence. Her first stop was Peter's office. This time she acted methodically, carefully checking each drawer, each folder. She found more receipts, bank statements, and even some printed emails for some absurd reason. Each find was like a new blow, but she didn't let herself break. Instead, she felt her resolve growing with each new document. She knew these were her weapons. They would help her not only restore justice, but also preserve her dignity. By evening, Amelia had contacted a lawyer recommended by a friend. Mr. Jefferson was an experienced and confident man who immediately understood the seriousness of her situation. "You have a chance not only to protect your rights, but also to achieve justice, Mrs. Kincaid," he said, reviewing the documents she provided. "I'm ready to take on this case." Those words sounded like music to Amelia. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had an ally. Later that night, Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, holding a photo frame with a picture of her, Peter, and Vivian. The smiles on their faces were so genuine, so happy. Her eyes filled with tears. "You thought you destroyed me," she whispered, looking into the void. "But you don't understand that you yourselves have kindled the fire that will consume you." With those words, she set the photo aside and went to bed. Tomorrow was a new day, and she was ready to face it head-on. It all started with a troubling dream. Amelia saw herself surrounded by flames. They slowly crept up to her feet, but she felt no pain. Only fear mixed with determination. When she woke up, her heart was pounding, and one question echoed in her mind. How far am I willing to go? She got out of bed, feeling the fire within her ignite. Outside, the sky was covered with leaden clouds promising rain. This day seemed like a harbinger of change. Amelia stood before the mirror, looking at her reflection. The eyes that had recently been filled with despair now shone with determination. She combed her hair, put on a dark suit, and gathered the documents into a folder. Today she would not be a victim. Today her battle would begin. First, she headed to Mr. Jefferson's office. She entered the room with a confident posture, though inside she still felt tension. Jefferson looked up at her and nodded. "Have a seat, Mrs. Kincaid. I've already started preparing the basis for your case." Amelia opened the folder and laid out the new documents she had found the night before. Among them were receipts, statements, and even their correspondence, which she had managed to print out. She spoke calmly, but her voice was firm. "I want them to pay for everything," she said, looking straight into Jefferson's eyes. "Not just for ruining our family, but for how they humiliated me." He nodded, reviewing the materials. "We'll start with your property division claim. Also, I suggest involving an independent auditor to review your husband's financial activities. This could reveal more hidden violations." Her heart quickened. This was not just a conversation, it was a plan of action. After the meeting, Amelia stopped by a small cafe. She got a coffee, sat by the window, and watched the raindrops trickle down the glass. It was a strange moment of calm amid her inner storm. She opened her laptop and wrote 2 letters, one to Peter's boss, the other to the tax service. In each, she pointed out the suspicious financial transactions that had found confirmation in her documents. As she hit the send button, she felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't turn back. At that moment, she realized she was no longer the woman who could be humiliated or broken. She was the one who had started playing by her own rules. In the evening, she received a notification. Peter's boss confirmed receiving her message. Amelia closed her laptop, feeling a slight shiver, but this time it was not weakness, but adrenaline. She looked out the window where the horizon was clearing of storm clouds. Her thoughts were clear. Today was the first step, and tomorrow they would feel it. Amelia didn't know what to expect when she sent her letters, but the response from Peter's boss came faster than she could have anticipated. In a short message filled with formal phrases, he expressed gratitude for the provided information and promised to conduct an internal investigation. This news could have been encouraging if not for the unsettling aftertaste that wouldn't leave her. What if they found a way to cover their tracks? What if this wasn't enough? That evening, she sat in the kitchen, pondering her next steps, when she heard a soft knock at the door. Her heart tightened. Who could it be? She cautiously approached the door and peeked through the peephole. Standing on the doorstep was an unfamiliar woman with a worried expression. "Mrs. Kincaid?" the woman asked as soon as Amelia opened the door. "I'm Jessica Rhodes. I worked with your husband." Amelia frowned, gesturing for her to come in. Jessica looked troubled. Her hands trembled as she handed over an envelope. "I can't keep silent anymore," she said. "These are copies of some documents I accidentally discovered. They indicate that your husband and Isabel are involved in something bigger than just an affair." Amelia sat at the table opening the envelope. Inside were financial reports, black and white printouts that confirmed her worst fears. Peter had been using company funds for personal purposes. It wasn't just hotels and restaurants. Sums were being transferred to unknown accounts. "Why did you bring this to me?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling with mixed emotions. "Because I'm tired of turning a blind eye," Jessica replied, "and because I was also a victim of his manipulations." Those words struck like a bolt of lightning. Amelia closed her eyes, feeling a storm of emotions wash over her. Anger, pain, determination. Everything blended into a knot that grew tighter with each passing moment. The meeting with Jessica was a catalyst, but Amelia knew she needed more time to process everything. The morning began with endless calls, lawyers, financial advisors, new witnesses. Amelia felt her life turning into a complex chess game where every move had to be calculated in advance. At lunch with Jefferson, in a small, quiet cafe, he spread out the papers in front of her. "I've passed your materials on to the relevant authorities. It's a matter of time before their finances are checked," he said, looking at her. "But what do you say about this?" He showed her documents with transfers in Isabel's name. Amelia felt her blood run cold. "She used my family, our resources. Everything I built," she said softly. Her voice trembled with anger. "But she made a mistake. Now I have every reason to ruin her plans." "Exactly," Jefferson nodded. "This is no longer just a divorce case, Amelia. This is a real war." After their conversation, Amelia decided she would no longer hold back. She contacted an independent detective hired to verify the details Jessica had mentioned. That same evening, he sent her the first message. "I found additional information about Peter's offshore accounts. This money was used for large purchases made in Isabel's name." Amelia felt anger welling up inside her, but instead of losing control, she took hold of herself. Her response was brief. "Find more." The next day, Agent Lawrence from the investigations department called her. "We are examining your documents, Mrs. Kincaid. There are grounds to believe that your husband is hiding much more. Tomorrow morning, we need to meet." Amelia agreed. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were shining with rage, but behind them now stood confidence. Tomorrow, Peter and Isabel would receive the first blow, and this blow would be the beginning of their end. The next morning, Amelia met with Agent Lawrence in his office. The documents and photographs she provided elicited an immediate reaction. "This is serious," Lawrence said, reviewing the folders. "We will initiate an investigation. Are you ready to cooperate further if needed?" "Yes," Amelia replied confidently. "I want the truth to come out." That evening, Amelia received a message from the detective. The new report contained shocking details. Peter and Isabel were not only stealing company money, but also attempting a major scam through shell companies. The details were too complex to ignore. "This is your defense," Jefferson said, examining the documents. "If they get caught on this, your case is won." Amelia felt relief but knew there was still much work ahead. Her battle had entered a new stage, and she was ready to fight to the end. Amelia sat in her living room, holding the folder with the final documents. Around her was silence, broken only by the soft rustling of pages. It was a silence that promised not an end, but a new beginning. Everything was coming to a head, and Amelia knew her plan was on the verge of fulfillment. The next day, in a courtroom packed with press and observers, Amelia took her place next to Mr. Jefferson. Peter and Isabel sat on the opposite side, their faces grim and wary. Isabel looked like she was ready to flee at any moment, and Peter avoided eye contact with anyone. The judge entered the room, and everyone stood. When the hearing began, Mr. Jefferson stood to present the evidence they had been gathering for weeks. He started with bank statements, then moved on to financial reports provided by Jessica. Your Honor, these pieces of evidence demonstrate the systematic use of corporate funds for personal purposes by the defendants. This is not only a breach of the employment contract, but also a direct violation of the law. Peter squirmed in his seat, his face flushed. Isabel cast him a panicked glance. When it was the detective's turn, whom Amelia had hired, he presented additional evidence. Recordings of conversations confirming that Peter and Isabel had acted knowingly and intentionally. We also discovered offshore accounts, he said. These funds were transferred there with the intent to evade taxes and conceal traces. A tense silence hung in the courtroom. Peter grabbed his head as if trying to grasp the extent of his mistakes. Isabel leaned towards her lawyer, whispering for help, but judging by his expression, he understood the case was lost. After the hearing, Amelia left the courtroom with a sense of relief. This was not just a victory, it was her triumph. She went home, where Vivian was waiting for her. Her daughter greeted her with a hug and a smile that warmed Amelia's heart. Mom, I'm proud of you, Vivian said. You showed that no one has the right to treat you that way. Amelia smiled, her eyes filling with tears. This was a fight for both of us, she replied. The next day, news of the charges against Peter and Isabel spread across all channels. Their faces flashed on screens, accompanied by loud headlines about fraud and abuse. The reputation they had built over the years crumbled in mere hours. Amelia stood by the window, watching the sunset. She knew there would still be many challenges ahead, but now she was ready for them. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman who had rebuilt her life from the ruins. Her phone rang. It was Mr. Jefferson. Amelia, I wanted to share some good news. The court has ordered a significant portion of the property to be returned to you, as well as compensation for emotional distress. Thank you, she said, her voice calm. This is what I was aiming for. That evening, Amelia sat on the veranda sipping tea. Next to her, Vivian was flipping through the pages of a book. They sat in silence, but it was that warm silence that speaks more than words. Peace had returned to their lives. Mom, what's next? Vivian asked, looking at her. Amelia smiled. We'll live, Vivian, a real life, without lies and fear. That moment marked the beginning of a new path for Amelia. Her struggle was over, but her story was just beginning. Now she was free to build her life the way she deserved, and she knew that no enemy could break her anymore.